grandpa stole his first buggy in 1892. I met your grandma pig slopping in 46.
Oh, every Christmas we'd visit my Uncle Fred in prison.
And welcome to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. And I'm very excited about today's show because we're going to have a two-part visit with Nick DeVoe. Now, Nick is a guy whose dad was a pilot in World War II, and Nick wound up with his pilot logbook. Well, a few years ago, he discovered that there were other World War II vets out there who were very old and decided to start sending it around the world. And it's been traveling the world ever since for the last 4 or 5 years. And he's had it signed by somewhere around 113 people from all the different participating countries of World War II. Pilots and victims of different historical events. It's an amazing story. You're going to want to hear what got Nick going on this, some of the names, some of the stories in there, and what he's going to do with it. That's coming up in about 10 minutes or so. Hey, sign up for our weekly Genie newsletter today. You can do it for free at ExtremeGenes.com or on our Facebook page. Get a blog from me each week, a couple of links to past and present shows, and links to stories that you'll appreciate as a genealogist. Right now, off to Boston, Massachusetts, David Allen Lambert is standing by, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. David, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing really good, and also suffering from the hairs on the back of my neck still standing up after a discovery I found recently.
Oh, now what did you find?
Well, I was looking for my elusive grandfather, who, of course, has disappeared into thin air after 1953.
This was the criminal, right? The criminal.
Yeah, this is my grandfather who liked to be behind bars and behind bars. This is what I was looking for. But then I found a front page article in November 1945 that mentioned my father in an auto accident. Now, the thing about this, Fish, is I was a kid. My dad forewarned me that he was in a bad accident one time, but I never got a lot of the details about it, and I always thought it was in a neighboring town. Well, the article goes on to say that my father, who was 20 years old at the time, and his cousin, who just died, who was 16 at the time, were in an accident. The driver was thrown clear of the car, but the car crashed into a tree, split the tree in half. The car burst into flames. And if it wasn't for a nearby person in their house who saw the accident, who ran and pulled my father and the others out of the vehicle, I might not be having this conversation with you.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, that would make your hair stand up a little bit. That was a close one, huh?
Yeah, and I wanted to hopefully track down what happened to the veteran who pulled them out in November of 45. But he died a year after my dad did. But I'm still looking to pay respects at his grave, let alone track down his kids and say thank you.
Wow. So, what a story.
Small world.
Yeah, really small world. Isn't that amazing?
Genealogy never lacks the excitement and the new discoveries. And this kind of comes into the first story I want to mention, which is, of course, on ExtremeGenes.com. This is a story of Kathy Gilchrist, who got a surprise of her life when she found her biological dad. Now, that's not uncommon now because you're getting the DNA discoveries. When she had tested with 23andMe, and she found out that her father, William Bradford Bishop Jr., was a highly educated former Foreign Service officer in the U.S. State Department, in 1976 killed his 68-year-old mother, 37-year-old wife, and 3 sons. He's one of the most wanted people by the FBI.
Well, I've never heard a story quite like that. Wow.
Well, it's not just a genealogist tracking down their dad. It's the FBI. Wonder who will find him first. My bet is on the genealogist, actually.
Yes.
Well, I want to tip my hat and wish a happy 114th birthday to America's oldest resident, and that is a Nebraska lady by the name of Thelma Sutcliffe of Omaha. She, on April 17th, after Hester Ford, who was 115, passed away, became the oldest person in America. She was born October 1st, 1906.
That's crazy.
Happy birthday, Thelma. You know, I love when people are doing their genealogy and find an ancestor, then they just prove it and they find that they've lost that ancestor. Well, some people have found they had Viking DNA, and then their results now tell them they don't have Viking DNA. Well, this is a museum in Denmark that in 1868 required the remains of a Viking nobleman that had been dug up in a farm, and all of the artifacts. Yeah, apparently they were mislabeled and put away safely in the museum for cold storage for a long time. They've just been found again. So I hate it when they lose my ancestors like that.
Right. Who knew?
Do you have any Viking ancestors?
Oh, I'm sure I do, but I mean, they're so far back, I don't know who they would be. I mean, I'm half Scandinavian.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, so I guess it could have been anybody's ancestor because that grave dates back to 970 AD.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of cemeteries, the city of Richmond, Virginia, just recently bought back a lot of land, 1.2 acres, known as the Shawko Hill African Burying Ground. It was last used in the 1870s, and it was a cemetery for free people of color. And this cemetery dates back at least 200 years. And if you look at the picture of it online from the Richmond Times-Dispatch, there's an abandoned gas station with a lot of graffiti on it. And obviously, somewhere in there are the remains of probably hundreds of individuals.
What a great story.
Well, it's always nice when they can locate these cemeteries, and maybe there will be some preservation. At least start with maybe take down the gas station and put up a fence. You know, archaeologists recently doing some work in Israel found out that a fragment of pottery from 1450 BC supplies that missing link in the history of the alphabet. They know around 1800 BC in the Sinai Peninsula that the alphabet started to get developed, and that it originally started to spread by 1300 BC into what became the Greek and Latin alphabets. Well, that's all I have from Beantown this week. So if you want to find out more about where I work, American Ancestors and AmericanAncestors.org welcome you to become a member. And if you do so and want to save $20, use the coupon code EXTREME on AmericanAncestors.org.
All right, David, thank you so much. We'll talk to you at the back end of the show for Ask Us Anything. And coming up next, we're going to talk to Nick DeVoe. He's a guy whose dad was a World War II pilot. He has the pilot book, and he's been doing some amazing things with it. You're going to want to hear all about it coming up next in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show.
Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree? Are you unsure how to use your DNA test results to resolve a research question? Do you want to travel where your ancestors walked and need to find details before you go? Need help joining a lineage society? Whatever your genealogy research question, the answer is Legacy Tree Genealogist. Legacy Tree Genealogist has been helping clients all over the globe discover their story since 2004. Legacy Tree has carefully selected and trained professionals who specialize in hundreds of countries and languages, as well as probate research and DNA analysis. And when you need experts on the ground in the countries where your ancestors came from, Legacy Tree Genealogists calls upon its global network of on-site researchers who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. That's legacytree.com.
Genies, if you haven't done so yet, you've got to check out Ancestry.com's new storytelling creation center, Ancestry Stories. Their story builder allows you to create a story with 6 different slide types, including a title page, a photo display page, including stock pictures they provide, and documents. And you can write a summary. And with those photos, you can add motion, panning left to right or right to left. For now, these stories can only be created on your iPhone, but Android is still to come and can be saved to your ancestors' pages on your trees. You can then access via phone, and in time, it'll appear on your desktop. You can also share it with family members and friends, whether or not they subscribe to Ancestry.com. For the younger generation that wants stories in a quick and easy-to-consume form, you can't beat this. I've already shared a story with my family, and the reactions are remarkable. Try out these incredible new tools and share your new story creations on social media using hashtag MyAncestryStory. Hey Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. Well, you know, we've been doing Extreme Genes for almost 8 years now, and we're still having firsts. This is the first time I've actually ever interviewed somebody while they're on the beach, and it's the first time I've ever spoken to anybody in St. Lucia for their story, but that's the case with Nick DeVoe. Nick, welcome to Extreme Genes. Great to have you.
Scott, it's such an honor and a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon, and really looking forward to speaking with you today.
Well, I hope you stay nice and dry and don't sunburn as we chat here.
Under a shady tree.
Very nice.
Well positioned.
Well, Nick has come up with a great story and a great project based on his father's logbook as a pilot in World War II for the RAF and the RCAF, for the Canadians as well. Give us a little background on your dad, Nick.
So my father was born in St. Lucia in 1920. So if he were still alive, he'd be 101. And when the war broke out here, St. Lucia being an English colony, basically all British citizens. And what's also very interesting at the time, and I'm only now realizing this, is that the Germans were actually in our waters in a big way with their U-boats. And so there was real threat, real present danger to these islands. In fact, one day a submarine came into our harbor and torpedoed 2 ships, right?
Wow.
Right across from where I'm sitting now, yeah. And people died and the whole bit. So the war very much was on the front lines here in these islands. And my father, of course, being from here, many people from here did their part, wanted to go and join up, most of them in the merchant marine. But my father decided he wanted to be a pilot, and because, you know, that was a big draw,
Sure.
I think, for many young men at the time. So he was working in Trinidad, actually, hopped on a ship somewhere in the middle of 43 and got himself up into Canada, where there was a massive effort on to train pilots. Because, again, Canada also being a British territory, they set up a massive air training program just to process pilots as quickly as possible into the war effort.
And so he winds up over in England, yes, but no action.
Right. No action, because by the time, thankfully, by the time he qualified, which was in October 44, things were really starting to turn the way of the Allies, and war was really in its closing stages. And by the time he then transfers over to England, it's late in the day. And in fact, the European theater closed up pretty soon after that. And then also, by then, there was this glut of pilots. He had the option to volunteer for a glider mission into either Germany or Holland. But that, if you know about the, you know, like the 8th Air Force and the casualty rates there, which was staggering,
yes,
the chances of surviving a glider mission were even more horrendous. So wisely, the old man opted out of that one. I'm truly grateful.
When did he pass away?
So he died in 1997. Gosh, how long ago is that now? That's
like 24 years.
Yeah, it's a bit, yeah.
So you've got his logbook now from the time he entered the service. And at what point did you decide, you know what, this is a piece of history and I want to make it even more of a piece of history?
Right. So I had always had a fascination with World War II. Of course, my father, like many of his ilk, never really spoke about it. I knew one or two little things. In fact, I probably told you everything I knew from his perspective. So I had this interest in World War II, and I always knew about this book. And as a kid, even growing up, I kind of discovered it in my mom's dressing table drawer. I yanked it out there one day, and I'm going through it, and he had a couple of photos in there. And again, not really appreciating what I was looking at. I yanked the pictures out, even damaged a couple of the pages. But the book was always there. It was always there. his writing is so impeccable in the book. It's amazing. So he's got every single flight. It details everywhere he went, the planes he flew and all. And then I began to slowly appreciate what was really written in this document. But again, never really thinking that I was going to do anything with it. And then one day, there was a story that popped up on my news feed about a Japanese pilot. His name was Kiname Harada. And Mr. Harada was almost 100 years old, still alive in Japan. And his story is just phenomenal. He was at Pearl Harbor, although his job was just to stay with the carriers and defend them. Later on, he flew in Battle of Midway. He was shot down, I think, somewhere in the Guadalcanal area. So this is a man who saw a lot of action and had a lot of kills as well. He was an accomplished pilot. And then later in life, after the war, he became a very outspoken peace advocate. He thought that, violence and all the things that he had seen were just horrendous. He actually opened a kindergarten school. I've only discovered this recently, but he went to England. He met some of the pilots that he was in dogfights with. And so had a very high-profile latter part of his life. And again, this story just popped up out of the blue. It's not that I was looking for it or anything.
Sure.
Something just snapped inside of me, and I thought, wow, how amazing would it be for this gentleman to sign my father's logbook?
Of course. Yeah, the enemy.
Yeah. Well, not just the quote-unquote enemy, but just as an individual.
Sure, somebody who was part of the history scene, yes.
Of somebody who was there, and what a rich history this man had. So you would think if somebody was going to do this, they would sort of maybe find, I don't know, a local veteran, somebody down the road. No, I had to, I had to find somebody on the other side of the world, speaks no English, I speak no Japanese clearly, and had no idea how to make this connection. And I mentioned to you earlier that I worked with the OECS, which is an international organization. And my boss at the time did it because Jules happened to be heading out to Japan on a business trip. And I had one associate in Japan, a gentleman that I had dealt with on a separate matter, who's actually a New Zealander. So at least he spoke English. When I explained the whole crazy idea to him, I reached out to the reporter who had published the report, and we made contact, we made connection. And I got a sort of a green light to say that, yes, he would be open to signing the book. So the day came, and this was all sort of, how kind of, I don't know, when you make plans, but you don't really think through the nitty-gritty of the details. Well, the day finally came to put this document in an envelope. And Scott, I was shivering. My hands were shaking. I mean, the enormity of what I was about to do hit me.
Well, you were putting your dad's logbook at risk, too, weren't you? You're sending it on the other side of the world.
I mean, nuts. Who does this? And I'm trying to stuff it in an envelope, and the envelope was a little tight, and it's not really going in. And my hands are shaking. I was a wreck. I was sweating. I'm the last of 10. I hadn't told any of my siblings about this.
Ooh.
Not that they were terribly concerned either. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing was nuts. Well, first of all, to try and get an agreement with 10 siblings, it's impossible anyway. So this was never going to happen. If I told any of them about it, they would have had me committed. So I was like, you know what, I'm just doing this. So I stuff it in there, I get it in there, I address it, and I go down to my boss, and he's literally getting into a cab. And I'm like, here, please mail this when you get there. When he understood what I was doing, he was even more horrified than me. And he's pushing it back in my hands. Like, no, I'm not taking this. I said, no, you have to take it. And this kind of went back and forth. Eventually, I was like, look, take it. And off it went. And he went. And I didn't sleep very well for a couple of nights after that. I did not. I was just like, my God, what have you done? My friend in Japan got the book a couple of days later. And that just was such a huge relief in itself. And I thought, wow, great. So then we tried to contact and really get to, okay, how do we send the book to Mr. Harada? And somewhere in the midst of that, they wrote back and said, he's not doing so well. Try back in a couple of weeks. Well, in a couple of weeks, he passed away.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. So this is out the blocks. The book is in Japan. And I'm like, you have to be kidding me. But of course, he was 99. I was banking on him hitting the 100. I was like, yeah, he's going to hold on. He's going to make it. And, he passed away. So at that point, I was like, wow, okay, now what?
Yeah, but do you get the book back, or what happened?
Yeah, so I was like, wow, it was a real letdown, and I was like, wow. And then somehow President Obama was in Japan around the time and made a speech in his official capacity as a United States president at the Hiroshima Memorial. And it's the only time a U.S. president has done that. And at that speech was a gentleman who had survived the atomic bombing. His name was Shigeaki Mori. There's a photograph of President Obama in a big embrace with Mr. Mori. And I thought, okay, what's the story here? So I started to read, and Mr. Mori was about 10 years old on a bridge headed to school on August 6, 1945 in Hiroshima. The bomb falls, and he gets blown off the bridge, falls into the river, and that's how he survived the heat blast. Climbs up out of that into, this Armageddon, survives that whole horrendous story. And I don't know a lot about those details, but he did manage to survive.
Wow.
And subsequently grows up. But that's only the entry part of this story. Mr. Mori is a very avid historian. And before the bomb, his father was a policeman. And from his school, he could see that there were some U.S. servicemen who'd been shot down or were being kept captive at the police station where his father worked. And he could see these men, not many of them, I think it was about 4 or 5 of them, but he could see them, and he knew very well that they were U.S. POWs. Of course, they all died in the bomb. Years later, they built the memorial, and they put the names of all the victims, all the deceased Japanese people who died in Hiroshima are on this memorial. Shigeaki Mori, seeing this, felt that these U.S. servicemen, the names of these men deserved to be in that memorial. So somewhere, I think this is in the 70s or maybe in the 80s, this Japanese man who speaks no English, without the help of the internet, this information became declassified because, of course, immediately after the war, this was not spoken about. Nobody in the U.S. wanted anybody to know that they had killed their own people in the bombing. So this was sensitive information, but it subsequently became declassified. And Mr. Mori got this information, got the names. He went to the library, got some phone books, and begins to call people in the U.S. to try and track down their families. This man speaks no English. I'm not sure exactly how long it took him, but he eventually connected every single one of those men to their families in the U.S.
Wow.
There is a documentary called Paper Lanterns, produced by a man named Barry Frechette, which tells this story. And subsequently, Mr. Mori was able to get the names of these U.S. servicemen on that memorial in Hiroshima.
All right, we're going to take a break for a minute here, Nick. Your story's incredible, and listen to these people he's writing to get to sign his logbook from his father's days as a pilot in World War II. We're going to come back. We're going to hear more about Nick's incredible project from the beach in St. Lucia when we return in 5 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, we're back on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, talking to Nick DeVoe from a beach in St. Lucia right now, talking to him about his logbook project. It's the logbook of his father, who was a fighter pilot for the Brits during World War II, Cyril DeVoe, and he's been sending it around the world, having people connected to World War II autograph this book. They're getting up there in age now, Nick, and you were just telling me about the young man who somehow survived the Hiroshima blast in 1945 and then went on to get the American POWs who were killed in the blast added to the memorial there. So how did you get him to sign your dad's RAF logbook?
Right. So as I mentioned, Scott, the book was already in Japan with Mr. Harada having passed away, the initial intended recipient and signatory, who never signed. But then I discovered this thing with Mr. Mori, with President Obama, at this official ceremony where Obama made a speech at the Hiroshima Memorial. There's a photograph of President Obama hugging Mr. Mori, and we then reached out. Normally I find people through the articles, through the reporters who write about them. So we must have done that, although I honestly don't remember, but we did make contact. And then Mr. Mori's response was, yes, I'll sign it, but I'm not very well. I have to go to the hospital. And based on the heels of the immediate predecessor, gentleman who passed away, I thought, this is becoming a kiss of death. But thankfully, he recovered. And as I subsequently understand now, his hospital visits are regular because he deals with the legacy of the radiation poisoning. And
of course,
he suffers with cancer. Yeah. So anyway, he came out of the hospital and he signed the book. Book went to him, and then my buddy over there sent me a photograph and 2 simple words, Shigeaki Mori. That was it. There was no Japanese, there was no date, there was nothing. That was all he wrote. And when I saw that, it was like the curtains lifted and I realized, wow, how many other amazing stories are on this planet? That was 5 years ago. And I can tell you today we're at 113 signatures.
Oh, my gosh. Wow. And how many different countries are represented in those signatures, Nick?
At least 7 or 8. Canada through the Caribbean, Europe, Holland, Germany, England, the United States, back and forth. There are 2 loose pages from the book that sort of come loose at the bindings. One of those currently right now is in India, the subcontinent. It's been to Australia, New Zealand, of course, Japan. Been to Japan 3 times.
Really?
Right now it's in the U.S. In a few days, hopefully, 101-year-old Marthe Kohn, who was a Jewish spy.
Oh, wow.
Grew up in France. Yeah, she lives out in California. Just today, I received confirmation that she is willing and happy to sign the book. Her husband is a gentleman named Major Kohn, who also served in the Navy during the war. So they will do a couple signing, which would be amazing. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had the likes of Mr. Gail Halverson. He's the candy bomber, who you may have heard his story.
I've had him on Extreme Genes before.
Oh, lovely. What a wonderful gentleman he is. So gracious. I had Mr. Bud Anderson, who is the most prolific U.S. living ace still alive in the United States. Signed just after Mr. Halverson. So the stories go on and on. Just amazing people. But I also have people who not necessarily involved in the war, but just witnessed incredible things. You know, people that survived through the Battle of Britain. Obviously, experiences that will never, hopefully, happen again and will be gone once they all pass away. And you're right. I started this project much too late. There have been a few instances of persons who've said, yes, they're happy to sign, and then passed away. Jerry Yellen, he served in the very last air combat mission of World War II in Japan. Wrote me back a lovely email saying, yes, I'd be happy to sign, and I'll even send you. He'd written a few books and so on, and unfortunately passed away subsequently before I could get the book to him. So the heartbreaks that are part of the reality of this journey.
Sure. So, Nick, what are some of the interesting things that some of these people have written in your dad's pilot logbook?
You know, I had a neighbor. This woman is from Poland. This woman grew up with, and her husband was an operative dropping in behind enemy lines. Was picked up by the Gestapo and tortured. I think her brother was killed. I had no knowledge of this. These people, they almost raised me so close to my parents. I didn't even understand this. So when I subsequently found out really what the history was, she's now in a retirement home in England. But I wrote to her and she wrote, you know, there was a woman who signed just before her, a German lady, who was at one of those terrible carpet bombings that the Allies did to the Germans towards the end of the war. Cologne. And I have people who've survived Dresden as well. Unreal. But this woman experienced that similar type of firebombing and the tornadoes and the whole bit. And then the book went to this other lady that I'm mentioning to you. But she just wrote, oh, that was just one experience. I survived days on end of bombs that fell in the area where she was. So it was just interesting how people compare and contrast. Of course, the stories are equally horrific to me. But when you really sit and you go through the experiences from these people's perspective, it's a very interesting thing to get that real personal, emotional experience. Yeah.
So are you going to take like photocopies of these signatures and then write up their stories next to them?
Yes. So that's exactly what we're doing. We have a website, the Logbookproject.com. A gentleman out of Sweden has helped me tremendously. He just contacted me last year and he said, listen, what you're doing is amazing. How can I help? Lars went and built out this website. It's the most amazing thing. And we are now able to have the profiles, put the stories up, and he's also doing other graphics and shows, you know, where the book has gone. And then the backstories, the related stories of people who either assist or some of the crazy connections. For instance, going back to Mr. Maury survived the atom bomb. Well, on the Indianapolis, the story of them carrying parts of the bomb to Ulithi and then being torpedoed and then spending 3.5 days in the water. I have one gentleman off the Indianapolis, Mr. Edgar Harrell, who signed the book. And so you begin to understand some of these crazy connections. Yes, not directly, but just it's a mind blow in that sense that, you know, here's one individual who contributed or was part of this, and here's another individual who was affected by, and And there's quite a number of those. And so we're beginning to piece some of those crazy connections together, even between some of the signatories, which is fascinating to me.
Absolutely. I totally get it. So obviously we're going to run out of World War II people here really, really soon. And you're obviously already experiencing a lot of that, people who pass away before they get the chance to sign it. So there is a finish line to this at some point. What are you going to do with the logbook when this is all finished?
Yeah, the actual repository for the logbook is still very much up in the air. I mean, on one hand, it's just a dusty old logbook from my father, and there are thousands of them out there in the planet. And my father never really went on any exotic missions or anything like that. So in that sense, it's very ordinary. There's nothing really special about it. On the other hand, people are terrified to touch it now. Just a couple of weeks ago, we've informally started something called the Hue Club. And that's the reaction that people have. They'll go, okay, yes, I'll receive it. And my father, my mother will sign it. And then they get rid of it. And it's just like, phew. And they wrap it up like a bomb and off it goes. And it is insane. And I could vanish at any moment. But the experiences that I have had, the people that I've met, my whole appreciation for life in general, I'll never be the same person again. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. But as to what to actually do with this book, maybe have it traveling around from place to place. Because if it sits in a corner collecting dust, it's not doing anything. So it's really the vibrancy of the stories and getting those out. That to me is more important. And through the website, I think that's where our primary focus will be. But I would like to make the book available to museums and other institutions out there that still celebrate anniversaries of different things during the war.
He's Nick DeVoe. He's on a beach in St. Lucia and it's sharing these amazing stories. Nick, thanks so much for your time. Good luck to you in the future with all this, and we look forward to seeing what comes of it down the line.
Scott, I really want to thank you for your time. It's networking like this that helps get the stories out. So this is so tremendous of you. Thank you. And I wish you all the success in the world with what you are doing.
And coming up next, David Allen Lambert returns from AmericanAncestors.org as we do another round of Ask Us Anything, answering your questions on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, when we return in 3 minutes. Genies, 10 years ago, in April of 2012, when the government released the 1940 census, it took Ancestry several months to complete and review an accurate index. Fast forward to today, using proprietary handwriting reading software, it took Ancestry only 9 days to get the job done with the 1950 census. Now, they held back results for a time for actual humans to review what the software had created. And after just a few weeks, it became obvious the software was near perfect, and the computer-generated index to 153,000 names has been released. What does this mean in your journey to research your family? It means you can search the entire database quickly and easily for your family members. Never has a U.S. Census Index been created as quickly as this. Go to Ancestry.com today, click on the 1950 census on the homepage, and see what you can discover. Hey Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow Genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies.
Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree? Are you unsure how to use your DNA test results to resolve a research question? Do you want to travel where your ancestors walked and need to find details before you go? Need help joining a lineage society? Whatever your genealogy research question, the answer is Legacy Tree Genealogist. Legacy Tree Genealogist has been helping clients all over the globe discover their story since 2004. Legacy Tree has carefully selected and trained professionals who specialize in hundreds of countries and languages, as well as probate research and DNA analysis. And when you need experts on the ground in the countries where your ancestors came from, Legacy Tree Genealogists calls upon its global network of on-site researchers who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. That's legacytree.com.
All right, it's time once again for Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. David Allen Lambert is back, and Dave, we have a great question here from Joe Miller in Sunset Beach, North Carolina. And he says, guys, how common is it for passengers to not be on a ship's passenger list in the 19th century? An interesting question. I'll get your take first, Dave.
Well, there's many factors to consider. I mean, one obviously is that they could have stowed away, which is probably very slim on the line of possibility.
Otherwise,
names could be misspelt completely.
Yeah.
They may have chose a different name when they emigrated. Generally speaking, though, a passenger list is usually created at the point of the departure. The big myth that you've probably had many people ask you over the years, I get all the time, what names are changed at Ellis Island? So the name wasn't changed when you got here because that list was created when they left. So the name being changed may have been at the point of origin. The other thing is 1820 is a real pinnacle year. That's when the federal government started recording passenger lists. So not knowing when in the 19th century they're looking for fish, if it's between, say, 1801 and 1820, it's possible they just may have not been a list that survived.
Absolutely. There can be water damage. There can be misinterpretations of the handwriting when it comes to all kinds of things. I am missing an entire family of my second greats, my second great-grandfather, my second great-grandmother, and their kids, and another second great-grandfather. I think it's his right name. It's fairly common, but it matches the month and year that I thought it should be. But there's no wife, there are no kids, and I don't know where they are either. So it's also possible, too, that they wound up coming into a different port than you were expecting, and maybe you'd find them elsewhere.
And that's true. In Massachusetts, most people are obviously coming into Boston, but we have the port of New Bedford, Newburyport. Well, a lot of these early customs house records, they're not well kept. And I know people that I've seen naturalizations for. It says, I arrived in this port on this date, and it's not a major port. Then you go to try to find passenger arrivals for that port, and there isn't anything.
Yeah.
So it could be part of that reason, too. I'd be curious to see where the naturalization is pointing for their arrival port.
And the challenge is also to figure out where they left from. Are their records left back in the old country?
That's very true. Like for most people that were coming out of England in the 19th century, those records really don't start to begin until the 1860s.
Yeah.
So you're not getting a lot of the earlier ones. And then, people are always looking for their ancestors between 1620 and 1820. And for the most part, there's not a lot of ship manifests when you get into the 18th century that survive of any great magnitude. The best place to find those are, for instance, just as a side note, are in newspapers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, and you've got to consider, too, that there are probably still a lot of these smaller ports where the information in the passenger list have not been indexed or digitized yet.
That's true. And,
there's got to be a lot more out there.
Well, I can tell you that Family Search and Ancestry and groups like that have been working actively to try to find all of that type of American immigration records over the years. But there's always room for one more attic and one more public building that, oh, look what we found here.
Yeah. Well, it's a great challenge, and we wish you the best of luck, Joe. We appreciate the question, and I do struggle with that. I'm looking for those names all the time, and I just scratch my head as to why in the 1830s and 40s, coming into New York, I cannot find these people I'm looking for. So how about you, Dave?
I have some ancestors that I know should have been on a passenger list that I haven't quite found yet. Or if they come over as a chain migration, that the father comes over and the family's supposed to follow them soon after. When did the family come over? They show up on the census, but I don't find them arriving.
So I guess the answer would be yes, it's common. So thanks so much for that. We got another question with Ask Us Anything coming up next when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Back for part 2 of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher at this end with David Allen Lambert from AmericanAncestors.org. David, our second question today comes from Rick Lane in Farmington, Connecticut. And he says, guys, I have a first great-grandfather who had a business in upstate New York in the late 1800s. How would I research that business?
I can tell you there's lots of different angles that you can research a business. I mean, obviously, so many newspapers that are online. Looking for an ad the newspaper may have carried for your ancestor. Or better yet, the most popular thing for people, especially if it's an urban-related business, city directories. I mean, Boston has them back to 1789, so I've been able to use that to track down some of my 19th century ancestors' business, the different addresses they had. And, of course, one of the fun things to do with that is to plug in the address and see what's there now.
That's right.
It's kind of funny to see if it's still the same business or that type of business. I had one relative, my third great-grandfather, Henry Poor in Newburyport, had a mercantile business with someone. Their store was around for about 3 years until you see in the newspaper the dissolution of this partnership has ended, all stock and bills owed to us, blah, blah, blah. You know, it has all this great detail about the business closing and what the final sale of items would be. But I did a little work on it because it mentioned it was on a wharf. Well, that wharf is now filled in land. But I know the road, and it's now where the Newburyport Art Association is, and it's an 18th century brick building, and it's still standing, and I was able to get a tour of it inside and out, including a little room that had a fireplace upstairs, and I said, that's probably where he sat and had his porridge at night.
You're probably right about that. I think it's great fun. I had a great-grandfather who had a business in New York City in the late 19th century, and I found a lot of stuff in newspapers, and as you mentioned, Dave, directories. If you could make a timeline following through the directories when it started and then look for changes, say, in partnerships. We had some fires in his business, so there were the stories of the fires and how it burned the place down and how they had to rebuild. And also, by the way, there is a great source at Harvard University at their Baker Library there. It's the R.G. Dunn and Collection Reports. And they go through and actually analyze the viability of all these businesses. And I was actually able to find an account of my great-grandfather's business there, starting in 1855 and going all the way through to 1883. And there are mentions of my great-grandfather, his two brothers who were involved in the business, how they did business, where they were located. It was really great stuff, and I was really surprised how much could be found there.
You know, it's really amazing what's actually out there as more and more things get digitized. And of course, you want to check with local historical societies and see if they have actual account books or business papers. And sometimes tracking down the descendants of your ancestor that are not specifically your line. Maybe cousin Mabel out in Tacoma has a pile of papers that, oh, yeah, those are our great-grandfather's business records. Would you like them? You never know what you're going to find.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that because in 2014, I inherited a bunch of stuff from a third cousin, and among the items that he had was the business agreement from 1888 between my great-grandfather and his brother talking about their partnership. And it's like 5 pages of agreement, and both of them signed it at the end. I was absolutely amazed. So you never know what you can find out there that relates to the family and the business, but there's a lot to be found without getting into business records.
That really is. Well, good luck to them. I hope that they find everything they hope for, and maybe there's some story for Extreme Genes down the road.
Could be. Thanks so much, Rick, for the question. And, of course, if you have a question for Ask Us Anything, you can always email us at askusanything@extremegenes.com. David, thanks so much. Always great to talk to you, my friend.
Same here, my friend.
And that is our show for this week. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks once again to Nick DeVoe for coming on and talking about his dad's World War II pilot book and what he has been doing with it. An absolutely incredible story. If you missed any of it or you want to catch it again, listen to the podcast on iTunes, iHeartRadio, ExtremeGenes.com, Spotify, or TuneIn Radio. Talk to you next week. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.